Can a bell be made to ring without a sound, its tongue stilled, its bronze shivering with a secret only the night understands? Can Christmas lights tremble on water while the river holds its breath, as if the tide itself were reading a name from a ledger no priest has ever opened? And can a man walk beneath rafters that remember every whisper and every lash, and yet leave behind nothing but the hush of footsteps and the faintest scent of smoke? Savannah, winter, the year of small mercies and large lies. A house that groans like an old confession. A tower that points at heaven and forgets to look down. A silence that gathers, patient as frost. In that silence, something begins to count. Before we go deeper, pause a moment. The past does not return easily, and what you are about to hear was carried by whispers, not headlines. If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. Now step softly. The stairs ahead are wooden, and remember every weight. The bell above has a voice. Tonight it will learn another. By December, Savannah smelled of cypress and cold iron, of low-tide salt and pine smoke pinned to the air like a thin grey shawl. Morning iced the eaves in white lace, then melted into water that traced the seams of the clapboard house. The wind travelled the lanes like a cautious usher, touching shutters, rattling brass latches, smoothing the hair of Spanish moss that hung from the live oaks like tired curtains. The river said little in daylight. It saved its gossip for after dusk, when lanterns wrote yellow commas on the black page of water, and the docks creaked out their long sentences. The estate lay at the city's edge, too proud to call itself a farm, too hungry to be a gentleman's retreat. It wore its prosperity the way some people wear manners, conspicuously. Brick walks, a parlour lacquered with polish until the furniture looked like it could drown you in its dark, a dining table that had seen 100 Christmases and learned no shame, doors that had been slammed hard enough to leave permanent and at the far corner, as if planted where sky might meet punishment, the bell tower. It had been built not for beauty but for reach. The bell could rattle thunder out of a clear noon. It could pluck men from their sleep like a hawk stooping for a sparrow. The tongue of it, iron and obedient, answered every pull of rope with the blind faith of metal. Call to prayer, call to work, call to chase. In summer it rang when a name was missing from the field. In winter it rang when a shipment came early, or the ledger came up short. It rang for births that cost too much blood, and for deaths that cost too little regret. It rang, and the sound went everywhere, like a rumour forgiven because it was loud. The main house sighed with the weather. Floorboards kept memories in their seams, thin grey dust mixed with ash, a season's worth of swept-away words. In the kitchen, iron sang in small voices, skillet, kettle, poker, each with a black shine earned by use. On the back stoop, ropes slept coiled as if dreaming of a different purpose. Needles glinted where the seamstress left them, thin silver thorns pinning cloth to the hour. A wheelbarrow leaned into the fence like a tired man. Keys hung on a nail, not a ring but a cluster of teeth. Days were obedient, synced to bell and book. Before dawn, the yard hands assembled like dots on a line, heads bowed against a cold that trim breath to smoke. The steward counted, always counting as if numbers could keep a world from slipping. Work moved outward like frost across the pane, slow at first, then suddenly everywhere. Cotton bales remembered summer's heat even as December's light found them pale and quiet. Sugar hinted in barrels that had come a long way and kept their secrets under hoops of iron. Sunday meant a narrow permission, a hymn hummed too softly to be called singing, a shoe mended, a letter recited from memory because no quill was allowed to make it real. Children played with shadows and learned early which ones were safe to touch. The old kept counsel with their knees and their quiet. The young learnt how to leave a room without leaving proof. At dusk the house burned a smaller, safer sun behind glass. candlelight made the wallpaper look like it had a pulse. A decanter turned the room amber. A silver spoon kept time on porcelain. The master talked about prices as if the air had asked him. The mistress adjusted the piano scarf with a pinch that could bruise music. Laughter sometimes arrived like a stranger in the hallway and left just as... Across the yard, a figure moved through his hours as though they were beads on a string. Abram. He wore winter the way others wore opinions, without complaint. The fabric at his collar had softened from sweat and salt. His hands bore a permanent grammar of work, commas of scars, parentheses of old burns, a long hyphen of a cut that bridged thumb and forefinger. He did not hurry because haste drew eyes, and he had spent his life mastering the art of being unremarked. He knew the tower's steps counted 12 turns from ground to bell, that the third plank on the 6th landing lifted on a sigh because a nail had lost its temper, that the rope, when new, had rasped like a cat's tongue but now slid with a weary dolidity. He knew the kitchen clock stuttered in cold weather, losing a minute at dawn and gossiping it back at noon. He knew which hinges sang and which, with a kiss of ash and oil, would keep a secret. Snow did not often visit Savannah. Frost did, elegant and cruel, sketching white on rail and sill. On the 24th the sun walked with a cane. By late afternoon the sky had the colour of damp pewter, and the bell, silent on its beam, looked like a moon swallowed by wood. Someone somewhere began to hum a De Fidelis without any Latin left in it. The scent of oranges arrived in the kitchen like a rumour of warmth. Cloves pricked their skins where some vigilant hand had studied them for the holiday bowl. From a distant room the thin bones of a piano tested a carol, and then forgot it. At the edge of the yard the ground held its breath, and the live oaks held theirs. Even the river, habitual tattler, practised discretion. Night would come, calm and exact. The house was already rehearsing the noises it would pretend not to make. In a small room with a narrow bed and a window that offered only the back of a chimney, Abram sat, wrists on knees as if the body could be folded into a prayer without language. He had learned to measure hours with touch, the way a shirt cooled after work, the way a bruise warmed when memory brushed it, the way breath made a counting out of the dark. Christmas Eve gathered itself like a cloak, and the bell tower, tall as an accusation, waited. I learnt silence before I learnt my name. Names can be taken, traded, written down wrongly on a page and sworn right by a man with ink on his fingers. Silence stays. It wraps the tongue and the bones. It teaches you how to walk without teaching the floor how to answer you. It is the only room they do not own. I kept a ledger in that room, not with paper and quill. Those instruments belong to men who like to see their lies seated in chairs. Mine was a ledger of skin and weather, the blow that split the cuticle and made winter burn when it arrived. Debit. The day my sister's child was sold like an extra spoon. The sound the door made as the buyer left. Debit. The time the master laughed and called me steady, meaning useful, meaning, and I smiled with my mouth while my teeth kept still. Debit. A ledger needs numbers. I had none. So I counted with other things. Ribs through a shirt, nights without a cry, days with food that didn't taste like coins. They say patience is a Christian virtue. In truth, it is a tool, like a hook or a needle. You learn to thread it through your own hours until the shape of the day is held together by something invisible. The steward liked to watch us the way a cat watches grass, waiting for it to grow wrong. I watched the steward back, not with eyes but with habit. I knew when his worry began by the way he pinched his thumb and finger on the edge of the ledger book, as if he could feel a shortage before it walked out the door. I knew when the mistress grieved her vanished youth because the piano's right-hand keys got crowded with her temper and the left hand forgot its work. I knew the master's mercy days, and there were some days when his bottle slept and his voice remembered the boy he had been before money taught it how to rise. The bell tower was not a structure to me but a throat. I had stood below it on mornings when fog turned the yard into a blind mouth and felt the strike shiver the ribs of the world. Sound has weight. It falls on a man and leaves marks only he can see. With time you begin to answer it with another weight. The ledger fills and you become two men, one who lifts, carries, answers yes sir, and one who stands beside the ledger counting silently, his finger tracing invisible total. Some debts are old and lie sleeping under the nails, as if work has made them comfortable. Some are sharp and new and jump at the first chance to show themselves. The night they took Caleb, who laughed too easily and ran too well, the bell rang not for warning but for sport, and in that sound I heard an arithmetic I could not forgive. 1 boy minus 1 mother equals a quiet kitchen, and the white plates on the shelf looked pleased with their own sharp debit. When the winter of '51 stole my father's breath on a dawn that had no colour, the prayer that rose from the quarters was soft and brave and left no footprint. The bell rang late that day, as if it had been polishing its voice. Debit. The steward's rope knotted to a beam, not for punishment but for demonstration. When the centre of my back that never learned to fade entirely, and, like some relatives visited uninvited during storms, but a ledger, if it is true, also has credits. The night rain came down so hard it made the house think about being a ship, and for once we all slept through without dreaming work. Credit, the time old Naomi took a thimble of molasses meant for the table and hid it under her tongue to spoon into a child's mouth with her own spit. Credit, a handful of blackberries found where no one thought sweetness grew, my fingers cupping them as if they were a small, dark credit. The Sunday a preacher with no book pressed his palm to my shoulder and said nothing, because he knew the only sermon that could save us was silence. Credit. What I mean is this: a man can be master of nothing and still keep his accounts, and when the ledger grows full, the hands begin to know what to do, even if the mouth keeps still. I carried rope. I carried water. I carried the weight of men's mismeasured righteousness. I carried the bell's voice inside my chest until the bones around it learnt to echo, and all the while the winter of '53 lined up its cold like soldiers on a parade ground, precise, shining, with breath like cloud. On the 23rd, the river cut a slow, stern smile through the city. A night came with a small knife and trimmed the edges of everything. In the room that was mine, because they did not need it for themselves, I laid out what I owned: a shirt, a second shirt with a stubborn tear, needles, thread, a strip of cloth saved from the hem of a dress that had once made a girl look braver, if only for an hour, a little oil in a bottle that had forgotten what it held before, a sliver of tallow. The rope from the tower could be reached when the steward's back turned. Rope is loyal to any hand. Silence and patience sat beside me like two relatives who speak only when the youngest child leaves the room. I listened to my own breath and counted what would be required. Not plans. Plans are maps you hand to someone who might take them. No, simple remembrances. Which stair mooned first? Which latch needed a thumb to flatter it? When the kitchen went to sleep in truth and not in pretense. The bell is a witness, I thought. Let it be a witness that remembers something besides commands. I am not a hero. Heroes are carved, stood on mantels, dusted. I am a man who balances books no one else can read. The total, when it came, was simple. A sound had ruled our days. Sound would be summoned once more. Then, if there is a God for the quiet, let him read what is written and answer with whatever wind he has. Preparation is a kind of prayer that does not beg, it arranges. I began in daylight because daylight hides small obediences in plain sight. In the kitchen, where iron spoke in black tongues, I stood at the hearth and watched the keeper step away to scold a scullion for peeling oranges with too generous a hand. I reached for the poker, lifted it, felt the balance, returned it to its cradle. A tool should not notice it has been measured. I tried a ladle, heavy as a promise, replaced it, touched the shelf where candles stood in their quart of brass. The tallow at their bases remembered warmth and behaved accordingly, soft at the edges. From a crack jar I teased a thumb's worth of grease, just so, to wet a hinge later if a hinge desired quiet. No more, no less. Outside, the pump handled the cold like an old soldier and made a private groan when it rose. I learned that groan months ago and placed it in the ledger under ways to sneak a blessing. By the smokehouse, a coil of twine slept under a hook. I touched it with the back of my knuckles. Ownership is in the palm, respect is in the knuckle, and left it there. The tower's door wore a latch that forgave careful hands. Nails, in winter, forget their temper. Wood remembers everything. I walked past and taught my shoulder the measure of the frame. An orphan's hug. In my pocket, a scrap of cloth. Not for signal, not for disguise, for cost. Revenge without cost is theatre. The cloth had the colour of dusk and the weave of patience. I had stitched it with mended thread, the kind you save from a shirt that refuses to give up its work. Thread is a small river. If you bind it well, it carries weight. The seamstress laughed sometimes when she was alone, a little music made for herself. She taught me the grace of knots, 2 turns for a lie, 3 for a vow, 4 for an oath no one else will read. I chose 3. The vow in my pocket warmed to the body and learned the counting of my steps. At evening I stood with the others in the yard and looked at the big house as one looks at a storm you have decided not to outrun. Carols came through glass like birds that had lost the art of flight. The master had guests. Their hats told the truth about their hopes. A carriage waited in the lane and rope missed with its horses. Lanterns framed the porch, arithmetic of gold, balancing our darkness with their own. The steward passed like an inkblot on a good page, worried about spillage. He counted, always counting. I gave him the number he required and kept the rest for myself. The tower had a stair that curled like an old habit. I knew each turn by its smell. Oak in damp, oak in heat, oak that had swallowed a little salt from men's wrists. On the 3rd turn, a nail lifted its head like a man about to disagree. I patted it and it lay down. On the 6th landing, the plank with the sigh remembered me kindly. I had brought oil enough to convince the 7th hinge that tonight was a holy night. Hinge agreed and forgot to speak. Fire is not merely flame, it is a language with grammar and moods, and it prefers old sentences. I did not come to teach it any, I came to let it say what it already knew. The bell hung in its dark like a moon without weather. A rope trailed down, well-travelled, with the feeling of hair. I did not touch the tongue, I stood and let my presence explain itself to the wood. Below, the yard settled, dogs puzzled their chains into circles and then into sleep. Somewhere someone laughed the wrong laugh at the wrong joke and made the house blink. From the quarters a hum rose, soft as cotton nearing the gin, softer than prayer. I had work to do that was not work. I descended as a man descends into himself. In the shed I took the bottle with a little oil, a wick with more memory than cotton, the scrap of cloth with its 3-knot vow, and a small tin cup that had learned to carry heat without complaint. I put nothing else in my pockets. A man who needs a sack for vengeance has already been caught by it. I waited on the lee side of the smokehouse where the wind was busy elsewhere and trimmed the wick as if trimming a story to fit an hour. The sky above Savannah had practised indifference for years. Tonight it watched. Stars looked like spices thrown with a stingy hand. The moon, a thin coin, did not spend itself. I could smell the river thinking. From the porch the piano found the carol it wanted, and the lady's voice braided through it like ribbon through a child's hair, the kind that believes the ledger will never be seen, or the kind that knows it will and trembles. I put my hand on the tower door, and it remembered me. Inside, the stair waited with its old patience. I climbed like a man counting the bones of a long answer. At the 2nd turn I stopped, listening to learn whether the house had chosen to be a witness. Houses love gossip. This one had at last learned discretion. I went on. At the belfry, I let the night walk through me first. Wind arrived in a narrow ribbon and tested my resolve. I set the tin cup down near the base of the frame, where a knot of old shreds had collected, the cast-off fray from the rope, seasons of it. Dust is only memory caught in its own breath. I braided a few of those shreds with the wick and my vow cloth. I touched the oil to its mouth. I waited, not for flame, not yet, for permission. Revenge is a poor king. It must ask leave of the court that raised it. Down below the hour prepared itself. In the big house a toast was lifted. Candlesticks held their spines like soldiers. Crystal clicked a tiny polite bell. On the quarters porch, Naomi's hum slipped into a lullaby for no one and for everyone. I thought of my father's breath departing in 51. I thought of Caleb's feet flying and then not. I thought of the rope that had spoken too often with the wrong voice. The ledger found its total. Then I bowed, the way I had bowed 1,000 times for the wrong reasons, and set my scrap alight. I did not feed it like a child. I did not starve it like a stranger. I gave it air, then took some away. It learned me, it tasted the rope's old hair and remembered summer. It moved to the beam as if it had been told a story and wished to sit closer. It was the size of a coin, then of a tongue, then of a hush that glowed. It spoke in red that did not shout. The bell above breathed a tremor into its own iron. I stepped back. I was not there to admire anything. I was there to make sure what was said could be heard. The flame grew, not loud but sure, like a decision that has ceased needing language. Wood considered itself. The belfry filled with a smell like old sermons and new rain. Heat found my cheek and wrote its first letter there, gentle the way a mother writes a name on linen. The rope lifted its back as if to stretch. The tongue of the bell remembered purpose. Not yet, I thought, not the alarm they trained you for. A different ring. A ring the ledger would understand. I took the rope and held it the way one holds a hand that has hurt you and yet might save you. I pulled once, soft, so soft the bell answered only in its bones. Then again a shade harder, and a sound like a swallowed sob travelled through wood and winter, across yard and river, past oaks that had listened to other stories. I waited, counted, pulled again, and this time the bell gave a minor note, small, questioning, a child at a door. The fire answered with a breath you could see. Below the dogs woke to memory. The house stirred, but carefully, as if it wished not to be known for fear. I left the rope not dropped, not flung, laid it down like a truth placed on a table between enemies. I stepped backward into the stairwell and let darkness put its hand on my shoulder. There is a moment in any careful act when the world stops earning its keep and simply watches you. That moment stood with me on the 7th step. I looked up once, at the bell rim now wearing a thin ring of amber, and down once, at my feet that had learned to leave no testimony. Then I went, the way a sentence goes when it knows exactly which period is waiting. The first sign was not flame through shutter or smoke scrawling its grammar into the sky. It was heat gathering itself into a voice and teaching the bell how to tremble without shouting. The bronze took the warmth like a secret lover, shamefully, gratefully, holy. It vibrated, a hum beneath hearing, a bee in winter. Then a single low note shook free and rolled across the yard like a coin losing its patience. Inside the house, a guest set his glass down and looked toward the window as if someone had called his Christian name with a voice he had been trying to forget for 20 years. The mistress lifted her head, her hands paused above the keyboard and found that the air had thickened, the way air thickens when truth is about to enter a room uninvited. Candles blinked, the steward missed. The note did not rise to alarm, it did not gallop, it walked the way a man walks into a church after too much time away, slow, exact, unwilling to pretend. It crossed the lawn and moved through shirts hung on a line because someone believed they would dry in this weather. It slid along the fence rails where paint flaked like old promises. It entered the quarters and touched foreheads, a blessing that did not ask permission. I stood at the foot of the tower and listened as the wood above learned to remember summer. Fire spoke with the elegance of an elder telling a story that can bear only one listener at a time. It found knots and untied them with light. It discovered splinters and taught them to glow. A small rain of ash began, a grey, deliberate snowfall that needed no season to approve it. The bell's second note came like a heartbeat after a held breath. Men ran the way they always run when bells ring, toward their training, buckets, ladders, shouts that were only names mangled by fear. But the tower was not a barn or a shed, it was a pulpit. You do not douse a sermon, you endure it. The steward called for order, order did not obey. Dogs barked circles into the night and made no door bigger. The flame stepped outward, not wild, not drunk. It took the rope in hand and pressed its lesson up and down the fibres. When it reached the tongue, it kissed iron and learned a new language at once, resonance. The bell answered, voice widening, the way a mouth opens not to speak but to expel a long-guarded poison. One clear strike. The sound went out like a decree but returned like a confession. The city heard. A river. 2. At the porch's edge, the master shouted for men whose names he used the way he used tools. He pointed, he cursed the bell as if it were an employee. He commanded water in a season that kept it close. He found himself for the first time beneath a voice he had always believed belonged to him. He did not like the sensation. The mistress clutched her scarf as if it were a ledger balanced to the penny, and saw something in the air she could not fold away. I walked into the yard as if walking into weather. No one saw me because the bell had taken all the eyes. In the quarrel between flame and order, I was a quiet witness, the way a clerk watches a dispute and notes where the exact lie enters the conversation. The tower spoke now, without my hand. That was the point. Silence is the best accomplice. It leaves when the work begins and returns only when the story needs finishing. The first visible flame showed itself at an opening like a tongue tasting cold. It curled, decided the night was edible, and began to dine. Sparks leapt not far, and fell around the base like punctuation combs of ember that made the grass consider telling the truth. Smoke climbed and painted the season a shade deeper. It wrote words above the house that only the old trees could read. Neighbours arrived as neighbours always do, carrying curiosity in one hand and the possibility of help in the other, unsure which will be required. They craned, they nodded with their mouths dry. The bell, someone said, as if identifying a corpse in a crowd. The tower, someone else corrected, as if pedantry could pull down heat. A boy, too young for such night, whispered, "Christmas," and his mother shushed him, but a part of her nodded. For the carol still drifted, a ghost of melody from the parlour, refusing to admit the night had changed its key. "O come, all ye faithful." The tower obliged, it called all, faithful or not. The steward spotted me then, because that is a steward's trade, to locate the unremarkable. He opened his mouth and found that the bell's argument had dried his own. I looked at him the way one looks at a ledger when the sum is obvious. He understood and did not. He waved me toward a line of men handing up buckets. I went, because the role of a witness is to appear to assist the failure of old habits. We passed water hand to hand, and the water did what water does. Offered itself, but the fire was already fluent in the tower's grammar. It conjugated beams into memory and turned corners into light. Steam rose and blessed men's faces with heat, the way a childhood fever blesses a forehead with the proof of being alive. Someone shouted to cut the rope, as if silence could be restored with a knife. Another man tried to climb and found the stair giving testimony underfoot, each board telling its own story in smoke. The bell rang again, no longer a note but a sentence, with subject and object and the verb placed exactly where it could not be ignored. It said, "I have served lies." It said, "I have called the wrong shepherds." It said, "I have rung for sales and for searches and for the delight of men who wanted another man stopped mid-breath." It said, "Tonight I ring for the ledger." In the quarters some knelt, not to the bell, not to the flame, not to the house, to the arithmetic of years suddenly resolved. Tears came not as grief but as confirmation. Old Naomi, who had hummed, now rocked very slowly on her heels and whispered a name no one could hear. A child stared and, for once, did not ask. At last the tower shifted its weight like a man growing tired of standing in the wrong company. Beams surrendered with dignity, not chaos, leaning into the night as if tipping a hat to those who had endured its commands. The bell swung, tethered still, angry at nothing, and gave one high, surprised cry. Then the rope, educated by flame, forgot its allegiance. The bell fell. It did not crash to pieces. Judgment is rarely dust. It landed with a weight that taught the ground its lesson and rolled half a turn, mouth to earth, silenced by dirt at last. The sound it made, somewhere between a sob and a benediction, travelled an inch above the grass and into the souls of every person there. Men stepped back without knowing why. Women covered their throats. The master stood very straight, a man taking inventory and finding an item he had not expected to lose. I stood too, not proud, not frightened, simply present as a wit must be. The flame licked the last confession from the timbers and began to calm, satisfied. Smoke moved away in paragraphs. Sparks rose like saints who had been misunderstood. The night took back its darkness one small pocket at a time. "Who did this?" the steward asked the air, because asking people would make this a smaller story than it was. The air did not answer. The river pretended to look elsewhere. The live oaks, those old, bearded jurors, offered their usual verdict, silence. Christmas Eve had turned. Midnight approached, not loud, ready to hand the date to morning like a careful mother. The bell on its side cooled. Metal holds heat the way grief holds names, for a long time, longer than comfort allows. No rope moved now, no hand claimed victory. The ledger closed itself to protect the innocent arithmetic inside. Dawn walked in on tiptoe, respectful. Frost drew lace again where smoke had rubbed it away. The tower was a black tooth knocked from a lying mouth. Men moved about in the crisp light like figures in a cautionary painting. The steward coughed orders that came out as questions. The master wrote something angry in the house book, as if ink could undo Word travelled because word is a river even when the tide is wrong. By noon the city had folded the story into pockets and purses. In the market fishwives set their knives down to say, "The bell fell," and someone added, "On Christmas Eve," and someone else, "Sign enough," though for what no one agreed. A printer's boy trotted with sheets still wet, the ink lifting under his thumb. Fire at the edge of time, bell come down. The type had to choose whether to be scandal or omen. It chose both. Neighbours came back for daylight viewing, that safer piety. They spoke softly, as if the bell might take offence at their grammar. In one house a woman wrote to her sister. We were reminded, without saying of what. In another a man said, "Superstition," with a voice that wanted an angel to contradict him. Children stared at the bronze hulk and imagined giants. Old men touched it like a relic. A dog lifted its nose and decided the story was larger than its nose. On the estate, Ash discovered it had a talent for finding cuffs and hems. Soot drew stripes on cheeks and made equals without asking. The big house's windows kept their distance, glass abstained from mourning. The mistress walked through rooms collecting candlesticks as if extinguishing light could quiet rumour. The piano, its lid closed, held its breath. In the quarters, the day pretended to be a day. Bread was baked, water was hauled, A shirt was turned right side out and beaten back into obedience. But pauses lengthened. Tools waited in hands that watched the weather of the master's face. A glance could be a reprieve. It could be next season's hunger. Words stayed few because words were currency, and everyone, faving up. They asked questions in ways that were not questions. "Strange how old wood will take a spark, even in winter," said one man to no one. "Some say lightning without clouds, in December," said another, achieving astonishment without lying. The bell had it coming, Naomi said into her lap, and her lap nodded. The master sent for men who understood beams and budgets. They circled the ruin and spoke the professional language of measurements, which believes itself stronger than myth. "A dry seam along the northern brace," one said. "Friction in the rope track," another ventured, pleased to find a word that might persuade insurance. "Sabotage," the steward insisted, as if the right name could become a handle. The master looked at the bell and saw his own face in its dull shine, round and small, and chose not to mention it. At sundown, when the air grows honest, the river told itself the story again with better phrasing. A gull rode a current and tried to hear. The live oaks proved a slight breeze and allowed it to carry half-truths along the lane. Half-truths are excellent travellers. They require less luggage. In town, the church bells, others cousins, distant kin, observed a kind of courtesy and rang veiled. The sound was like a woman in mourning who has decided to attend dinner anyway. Men said grace with more ambition than usual. Women set an extra plate, not for a guest, but for the part of themselves that was listening at the window. A newspaper editorial asked for vigilance, and received it. People stayed up later than they meant to, staring into the dark as if it would write back. The quarters made a small supper, biscuits, greens, a sweetness that found its way by means no ledger could track. Children fell asleep mid-whisper. The old eyed the bell through walls as if distance were thin cloth. A boy asked Naomi what miracle means. "Same as trouble," she said, "but with better manners." No arrest came. The steward trained his suspicion like a hound and found that it preferred to sleep on his own porch. He grew thin in ideas. The master decided on rebuilding because men like him believed that height can be restored by lumber. He spoke of a taller tower, a sterner rope, a bell whose voice would be corrected by expense. The mistress found a charity and sent a small money to it, the way some people apologize for the weather. The guests wrote letters about the night to relatives who would fold those letters into drawers and take them out again when company came. And Abram? He worked, he showed his back to the ruin and his hands to the day. He ate what was placed, not more, not less. He stood in the right lines and sat on the right stools, and slept at the appointed hours with eyes that knew how to shut and a mind that understood how to keep watch. The ledger did not gloat, ledgers do not. It balanced and closed itself without ceremony. Only sometimes, when alone by the pump at dusk, he touched the wood and felt, under his palm, a music that had nothing to do with bells. Ideas turn like pages in a damp book, slowly, carefully, with the ink threatening to bleed. The tower was rebuilt because timber believes in redemption if paid enough. A new bell came, earnest and obedient, with a voice like a well-schooled child. It rang on market days and funerals and for weather warnings that heaven declined to honour. It rang for births and for prices, for assemblies and for alarms. It did its job, people nodded. But now and then, when fog lay low and Christmas rook its old seat by the river, the new bell found its note wavered, as if an older voice were clearing its throat inside it. Children who had crouched at the first bell's fall grew into men who spoke carefully, and women who ironed with a firmer hand. They told the story in kitchens and under porches and at the edges of fields where shadows do not feel watched. On that night, they would say, the bell learned the difference between command and confession. The little ones asked who taught it. The elders smiled, which is to say they refused to betray the arithmetic. A name was not whispered. Names rot when you carry them past their usefulness. A deed was remembered. Remembrance is a city that keeps all its addresses secret. Papers browned and flaked in trunks. The editorial about vigilance puts its opinion to sleep and slept as hard as paper can. A penciled note survives on one margin still. It felt like justice. No one signed it. The penciled hand is neat, the kind of neat that learns itself when it must write in hiding. The trunk lives in an attic where dust has mastered patience, and the rafters repeat themselves to spiders all day. Some evenings, in a winter that has forgotten how to be cruel, a visitor will look up at the tower and say, "Fine work," and their companion will correct them, "A copy." The distinction matters to people who know that the world sometimes returns only as imitation, but to those who heard the first bell fall, the new metal's accuracy is a small courtesy at best. Truth, when it lands, dents the ground. Every faithful copy is a clean floor. There are men who still, on Christmas Eve, walk to the edge of the yard and remove their hats. They do not know why their fingers do this. Fingers keep their own memory. Women who were girls once put an extra biscuit on a saucer and break it in two and give one half to a child and one half to a corner of the room where no one sits. For the wind, they say. The wind admires good manners and eats quietly. And Abram. Some say he moved upriver and found work where wrists learned a different weight. Some say he was sold south, and that the south learned his name like a prayer it could not say in English. Some say he died in his sleep the way good ledgers close, in orderly silence on a summer night that didn't want to end. The truth is a coat we pass from shoulder to shoulder, and it fits each of us. But in the account books of the unseen an entry remains, written in a hand steady as winter, on the eve of Christ's Mass, the bell confessed. If you walk there now, when the city is busy with its own pride and the river practices forgetting, and you stand beneath the tower and close your eyes, you may hear nothing. That is the sound you are listening for. In it live the quiet of old oaks, the patience of thread, the politeness of embers cooling on their own authority. In it live a rope's last, honourable surrender, and a metal's prolonged admission that it had been used for wrong. In it lives a man who kept his books without ink, and taught a bell to read. The legend ends as legends must, half truth, half instruction, all warning. Do not build towers for lies, or if you do, understand that one winter a silence will climb your stairs and change what your bell means. You will still have a bell, but it will not be yours. It will belong to the ledger that waited in the room no one could own, where patience sat beside a man and counted to the end. And when the new bell rings, as it will, as bells do, you may hear another sound braided through it, so faint you will think a moth has touched your ear. It will be the bronze remembering heat. It will be the rope remembering light. It will be a man's footsteps settling the dust in a circle only he could walk. It will be a final page turned in a book that learned to write itself. No triumph, no applause, just a hush that knows what happened and intends to keep knowing. The river will carry the hush inland a little way for the trees to taste. The trees will carry it up to the birds, who will ignore it politely and sing anyway. And down by the base, where the first bell lay and learned the weight of dirt, grass will cover what metal once declared. The ledger will remain unfinished, because justice, when it returns, prefers not to be concluded. It likes to walk the perimeter, hand on the fence, listening for hinges that still want oil. On Christmas Eves thereafter, if you happen to be near and the air is honest, you may feel the ground hum for the briefest moment, not a quake, not a threat, a memory collecting itself. You will not say what you felt. You will merely remove your hat if you are the old kind, or touch your brow if you are the new, and you will turn for home, certain without reason that some debts do balance, that some towers do kneel, and that silence, when it chooses to speak, leaves behind a light that does not go out.